Hey there, my friends. Continuing our conversation about what it means to be disciples of Jesus who imitate his life, his way of life, allowing his word to shape us into people who have both his character and his competencies. We know that this happens in our temple spaces, certainly, but also in our daily life around our tables as we invest in and develop the three key relationships God has given us for this life: loving God and loving people. Leanne and I will be talking a little bit about spiritual disciplines as a way of life as we continue to wrestle with the ruthless elimination of hurry in a little bit. But for the time being, we're going to look at Acts chapter 17. My admonition to you is always to be in God's Word. So take a moment to read Acts 17, and I think you'll hear some of the same things that I'm going to point out to you, that different people start in different places with Jesus and view him and receive him in different ways. So if we look at the reception of Jesus in Thessalonica, where Paul and Silas and Timothy and Luke originally find themselves, they're originally received pretty warmly in the synagogue, but then there's this opposition. And I think some people will view Jesus as a threat to their way of life or even their power struggles, and the Jewish authorities certainly express that. You go a little further on, and you see that when they go to Berea, there's also a similar warm reception initially. But the Thessalonians are so incensed and enraged by this new way of life and this threat to Judaism that they send emissaries and really people to incite more riots in Berea. So is the gospel always going to be received evenly and with open arms and open hearts? Not always. So Paul keeps on moving along, and he goes to Athens, and he notices something else that he wants to point out, but he doesn't have the opportunity until he starts up conversations with people and proclaims Jesus as Messiah. And there's an academic interest in Jesus in Athens, because it's kind of the heart of Greek life, and the Greek pantheon is worshipped in various ways. So they invite Paul to essentially give a TED talk, like come to the Areopagus, the place where all academic lectures are given, and tell us about this foreign deity that you seem to be advocating for. And so he goes. These academics want to know what he's about. And I think verse 23, as he launches into this sermon or this TED talk, verse 23 reveals something to us that needs to be noted. He says in his sermon, "For as I was passing through and observing the objects of your worship, I even found an altar on which was inscribed, 'To an unknown God.' Therefore, what you worship in ignorance, this I proclaim to you." And he launches into a whole discourse about how Jesus is the Messiah. He says, "I see you're religious people. You're meaning-seeking people. And here's the one meaning that I don't want you to miss, that God doesn't want you to miss. Jesus, crucified, risen for you. That's the message I want you to hear, and that's the thing I'm proclaiming." Now, there's not a universal acclaim or reception of this message, but I think the reception that Paul receives in these different places is instructive to us. Not everyone is going to be Team Jesus right away. In fact, some are going to walk away saying, "Oh, that was a nice lecture, Paul," or trying to kick them out of the city by inciting a riot. And we're going to face some of the same responses to the message of the gospel too. But the important thing for us to note here is that Paul starts where people are. Whether it's an academic interest in Jesus, or it's I'm a Jew and now I'm seeing Jesus as Messiah. And he finds people of peace, people who are willing to continue the conversation and delve into what the gospel is about. Not everybody is going to be that person of peace. And not everybody is going to be wanting to develop a complex conversation about the intricacies of Christian theology with us in the 21st century. But we start where people are. Sometimes it's a simple act of mercy or kindness that leads into a deeper conversation. And sometimes it's a simple word of kindness or affirmation or compassion that leads into something that we are able to proclaim Jesus as Messiah, crucified and risen for the people that we're with. So I hope you're paying attention to these lessons from Acts for us here in the 21st century as God's people on his mission. And I'm going to hand it over to our conversation about the ruthless elimination of hurry that Leanne and I are going to have. I'll catch you on the other side.
Hey, so the section that we made it to, this intermission part of the book about spiritual disciplines, and Comer's making a point to talk about how we read a great variety of books and materials. It's a good thing. And he's talking about specifically when we read biographies. Maybe there's somebody that we admire and appreciate. We read their work, and we think that if we do the things that they have done, we might get similar results in our life. And the point he's making, do we read the Gospels in that same way? Do we look at Jesus and say, wow, I want to imitate him in my life? Or do we read the Gospels and say, oh, that's a good story?
And on the other side of things, do we read it as an academic textbook, as something that is the words of a wise sage? Or is it really the story of the Son of God, who's come down to earth to give us not just good teaching, which many people have done before that, but someone who's given us a way of life and a imitatable pattern that leads to deeper life? And what kind of patterns can we observe in Jesus' life that we can kind of take on for ourselves, not even graft into our own lives, but reorient our lives so that what Jesus values comes first instead of what we want to put first. And that's a radical reorientation that has to take place on a regular basis. And I'm not sure if our society or the way we've oriented our lives generally will lend itself to that. So it's going to be a tough thing to work on, but it's certainly something worthwhile.
Well, I think it's being mindful, again, just that word, intentional. When we read the Gospels and we see Jesus' invitation and challenge to us to come and follow him, he doesn't say, do X, Y, and Z, but he leads out his life in a way that sets the example for us to follow.
Precisely. Yeah, it's to come follow me isn't you better do this exactly as I have done in the past, but it is the more watch me, work with me, watch how I do it. Walk with me, work with me, watch how I do it. That's a more gentle invitation than here's a list of rules, because the Pharisees of Jesus' time would have loved to hear rules like do this, 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 this. Here's your checklist. Oh, I've done what I'm supposed to do. But it's a constant, consistent re-engagement with the heart of the Father. And these practices that are going to be coming up, I think, are going to give us a window into how we can more practically do that. Because it's good, like you said, to do academic looks at these different texts and whatnot. But at the same time, if they're not applied, if there's not a practical aspect to it, we miss the point. Well, my friends, that's about all I have for you for today. So as always, stay connected to God's Word and His promises that never change. Be well, look out for your neighbors and those around you, and I will see you next week. God's peace to you. Pastor out.